Before They Were the Bears is sponsored by Decatur Memorial Hospital, Jackson Ford, and Tate and Lyle. This special presentation, News Center 17 Sports, begins now.
When you drive into Decatur on Highway 51 heading south, if your eyes veer a little to the right side of the road, you're greeted each and every time with a sign that says Decatur, original home of the Chicago Bears. And it's not some outlandish claim or bizarre discrepancy either about what happened long ago. Instead, it's undeniable fact. But back then, this team wasn't the Bears just yet, and no one could have imagined how much a part of the culture of this state or entire Midwest they would become. But it's all in some way thanks to what happens here 86 years ago. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to a News Center 17 Sports special presentation. Before They Were the Bears, a look back at the 1920 Decatur Staleys, the team that begat the Chicago Staleys and ultimately morphed into the monsters of the Midway, the Chicago Bears. Brian Jodice joins us later, and myself, we both promise over the next half hour to give you the required history lesson on how it all begins, plus much, much more. But back then, professional football is very different from what you know about it these days. It's certainly not Rex Grossman and Mushin Muhammad over the middle for a score. These guys were just some of the lucky ones to be making any kind of a living with pro football at all, something that at the time only very few imagined could legitimately happen. They are true pioneers of this profession that captivates this country each and every Sunday. And to get to that point, there had to be a vision shared by a few dedicated men who believed pro football could turn into something, if not something special. But even they probably had no idea just what they were starting when they did. The first recorded instance of a player receiving money to play football happens in 1892. And as local independent teams grew stronger by recruiting the college stars of the day to play, it was only a matter of time before pro football's taken to the next level. As far as the Staleys are concerned, the idea came from starch manufacturer and company founder Augustus Eugene Staley. In his search for a man to run the team, led to University of Illinois alum George Halas. The rest is Staley's history. And what maybe forces the birth of the Staleys more than anything is an incident on November 30th, 1919. That day, the Staley Fellowship Club's football team is supposed to play a team in Arcola that includes the famous George Gipp of Notre Dame. Arcola's team beefs up with stars after being beat 41-0 the previous year. But rather than be embarrassed, Staley decides his team won't show up to play. But if Arcola could go out and improve their team with better players, two could play that game. Before they become the Bears, earning Grammy nominations for shuffling.
They call me sweetness, and I like to dance.
And adopted into the subculture of late-night TV.
Had a team that is known as the Bears. The Bears.
They start out as the Staleys, the year's 1920, the start of the Roaring 20s. Women's suffrage happens with the ratification of the 19th Amendment. The first commercial radio broadcast transmits in Pittsburgh and in Decatur. Starch manufacturer Augustus Eugene Staley unknowingly starts a franchise that would become a Sunday institution in Illinois and beyond. Although there are various independent teams in the area at the time, including a Staley Manufacturing Company version, Staley's desire to be more involved and put together a dominant club eventually leads him to hire 25-year-old University of Illinois engineering graduate and former New York Yankees right fielder George Halas. A hip injury in an exhibition game in 1919 eventually forced an early end to his baseball career and back to the gridiron, where when not working for the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railroad Company, Halas played football on the weekends for the Hammond Pros. Halas would also get the chance to play baseball at Staley since the Staley Fellowship Club starts a team in 1917.
Through Halas's ideas, energy, and recruitment of some of the best players of the time, the Staleys immediately find success while innovating the sport. All this is after Staley's initial contact with University of Illinois running back Dutch Sterneman, who decided to finish his engineering degree in Champaign instead, but later joins the Staleys as a player coach. Sterneman and Halas go about acquiring players for the Staleys as if they were a college coach today, trying to convince high school recruits to show up on campus. Because of this effort and their connections, they're able to acquire some of the game's all-time greats. Each player's guaranteed a job, and the team's allowed to practice 2 hours a day on company time, something unheard of prior to then. Next, Halas then helps form a league for the Staleys to play in. Before this, the sport's so loosely put together that teams were notorious for not showing up at all. On September 17th, 1920, the 11-team American Professional Football Associations, born in Ralph Hayes' automobile showroom in Canton, Ohio. You know it today simply as the NFL. In front of 2,000 people on October 3rd, 1920, the Staleys shut out the Moline Tractors 20-0 in their first ever game at 22nd and El Dorado Street. The Staleys finished their inaugural season with 10 wins, 1 loss, and 2 ties. The Staleys played 2 home games in 1921, but under growing economic pressures and company financial losses for the year of close to $700,000, Staley gives Halas $5,000 to move the team to Chicago under an agreement to just keep the name Staley for 1 year. Sterneman and Halas would become 50-50 partners while moving the franchise. They win the first recognized NFL title that season. On January 28, 1922, the Staleys become the Chicago Bears. All you need to do is look around in the Pro Football Hall of Fame to see the long-lasting impact of the Staleys. Without them, there is no today and another Bears season of football to watch.
Over the shoulder, end zone, touchdown! Touchdown Bears! There is a marker.
A day after Halas's death in 1983, his oldest daughter, Virginia McCaskey, takes over as the majority owner of the team. To this day, the Bears board of directors is a McCaskey roll call and not far removed from Papa Bear at all. Well, now that you're caught up on the beginnings of the Staleys, it's time to blow your mind a little further with our interactive Staley trivia to take you in and out of each break. It's not exactly the wheel, and I'm not Vanna White, but it's the best we can do. Before they were the Bears, Canton, Ohio, and the Pro Football Hall of Fame, where we'll find out exactly what it was like to be one of the very first professional football teams.
Welcome back to Before They Were the Bears. George Halas's importance to professional football cannot be understated. In fact, the road that leads to the Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio is George Halas Drive, fitting because once inside, those walls of gridiron history lead you right to the names associated with his early work, the Decatur Staleys. There are 5 Staleys who are forever enshrined in Canton alongside the game's greats. The hall comes into beginning September 7th, 1963, with an inaugural class of 17 inductees, and of course, George Halas is among that charter group. But in the next 2 years, 4 more Staleys would come into the hall as well. George Trafton, a Notre Dame alum and a center noted for his extremely physical style of play. Jimmy Conselman's a right halfback and one of the legendary early football names. In the 40s, he would play 2 separate stints with the Chicago Cardinals, one of the Bears' main rivals. Northwestern's John Patty Driscoll is one of the best backs and kickers in the game, and at end, Guy Chamberlain's considered to be one of the best players of the era. He would also go on to make his mark coaching in Canton. Believe it or not, thanks to guys like Chamberlain, the Staleys still have more Hall of Famers than 10 current NFL franchises. And why it makes sense is that relatively new teams like the Houston Texans, Jacksonville Jaguars, and Carolina Panthers just haven't had the time to yet develop their stars to fit into the Hall. It's certainly noticeable that the team that was only around for 1 year in 1920 has that long-lasting of an impact on the game. Now, the football in this time really like the Wild West, truly an anything-goes mentality where the rules were just starting to be written and eventually enforced. You just can't make some of the stories up that happened around the time, like 2 American Professional Association teams playing for the right to keep existing, the Chicago Cardinals and the Chicago Tigers, end the 1920 season for the rights to the city and keep playing because the others felt each was hurting the other's attendance. The Cards won, Tigers disbanded, and the Staleys show up there a year later on the north side at Cubs Park. All that and more is on display at the Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio. Here's Steve Breitwieser with more.
When you think of the NFL these days, it's sold-out stadiums, national television deals, and Super Bowl extravaganzas, but it wasn't always that way. Back in the 1920s, an entirely different brand of football was being played that eventually got everyone to this point.
This is kind of considered a dishonorable sport at the time. Oftentimes, a lot of these players had a college education and they could actually make more, doing a profession than actually playing pro football.
As far as football in the 1920s goes, they don't make them like they used to.
It was a single wing offense, and it was a lot of running. There was some forward passing, but it was pretty much, grinded out type of running game.
And the teams leave behind the equipment to prove it.
Basically, they used the materials they had, leather. There was no plastics in the 1920s. You would have leather helmets, with cotton padding, and then you'd also have jerseys, and you'd have leather shoulder pads with some cotton padding in there as well.
What the Staleys and others go through is a reaction to try to be a reputable part of the American sports landscape. Some of the concepts like defining player movement are constant themes with pro football that in some fashion never disappear.
That was kind of one of the major points, was to kind of, let's, instead of having players go back and forth and, these salaries keep growing, let's have a league, a set of rules, so we kind of control this and, make it profitable for everybody. It was very loosely organized back then. I mean, most of these players had other jobs and this was something they did on the side. I mean, there was a few well-known athletes that you would kind of build your team around.
For everyone involved with pro football in this era, it really did have a lot to do with simply the passion of wanting to play the game.
The oldest pro football contract we have in our collection is from a player that coached the local Canton team, and he was given $2 a game, and he was given a clean jersey for the season. So that was a pretty big deal back then. So if you didn't have to supply your own uniform, that was a bonus.
Well, the Bears have the most enshrinees of any NFL team with 26 members. The franchise also owns 9 world titles, 8 NFL championships, and of course, Super Bowl 20. That only trails Green Bay with their 14 total, 11 NFL championships and 3 Super Bowls. Both of these teams get born in the 20s, and one can only wonder, what if Staley had never told Halas to take them to Chicago? Could it have been a Packers-type situation? More on the Staleys' unique connection to the birth of the franchise when Before They Were the Bears continues.
There's a pretty impressive record of how the Decatur Staleys come to be, what they're able to do, and what those successes meant to the company, and they're all part of the literature put out by the company itself in the Staley Journals. Those are just some of the many documents that form a pretty solid working history of the beginnings of pro football via the Staleys. Now, other than the Green Bay Packers, whose franchise starts similarly, although officially a year later, with their roots and team name taken from the Indian Packing Company, no other current professional football team and very few sports franchises could trace their actual beginnings so close to private business. That's a unique connection that the Bears franchise will always hold on to. Here's Brian Jodice with more.
In 1988, Tate & Lyle purchased A.E. Staley Manufacturing. With that, the roots of the Chicago Bears as the Decatur Staleys went with the transaction and the continuity of ownership.
Mr. Staley was a true sportsman. He believed in sports. We had amateur sports here. We had fellowship clubs that had baseball teams and football teams, and he was a true sportsman, believed in sports, and believed in businesses like A.E. Staley backing sports clubs. And so with that idea, he started the Decatur Staleys, and he really was the father of what are now the Chicago Bears.
What started as a team of workers and college all-stars has since evolved into what the Chicago Bears are today. Who knows if A.E. Staley even envisioned that when he founded the team in 1920.
I don't think Mr. Staley could ever dream that it would have the size of, that the club would be as important as it is today and what a fixture in American football it is. But perhaps he did have that dream. But one of the most interesting things is, as he gave the money to Mr. Hallis to go to Chicago, and realizing that a professional football team really needed to be in a major city, he kept no ownership interest in the team. So I think if he probably would have dreamt that it would be as big as it is today, he no doubt would have kept some ownership interest in the team.
And when you spot Staley today at Soldier Field, you can only be talking about the one and only Staley the Bear, the official mascot of the Bears. His bio on the Bears website says he's a first-round pick in August of 2003, is friends with Pooh, Yogi, Boo Boo, and Smokey. Makes perfect sense. And once ate a cheesehead on a dare. When you see wacky mascot hijinks off Lake Michigan, Staley's your man, or bear. When Before the Bears returns to your TV, we take a look at the Staleys family tree in Decatur. That's next. As time moves on, it's inevitable that our connection to the Staleys grows farther apart. It's not right or wrong, just what happens, but it's different when this team's a part of your family story, like it is for Charlie May.
So this is one of my favorite keepsakes here.
Meet Charlie May. He worked more than 40 years for Caterpillar before retiring, played football for Taylorville and Milliken before that. But a generation earlier, his dad, Red Walter May, was a guard on the 1920 Staleys. And uncle, Chester Baldy May, also suited up for him. Charlie never knew his dad. Red passed away in 1934, 6 weeks before Charlie's born.
He was such an aggressive player in his day that George Hallis took a liking to him and brought him up. And the reason why that he was chosen to play for the Bears team there was that he was on a Taylorville independent team back in 1940 14, 15, 16, so somewhere in there. And they piled up a tremendous record.
Through the Staleys, he's been able to better understand the kind of man his dad was.
He elected to stay here in Decatur and keep the family going. So that's the reason why he didn't go to past 1921.
Charlie's so proud of his Bears heritage that he got an oversight that left Red off of the all-time players list one time, fixed by George Halas himself after writing him a letter. Both Red and Charlie are the perfect example of what the Staleys legacy is all about.
That kind of, in a nutshell, is my tie with the Bears. I mean, you know, it's kind of a humbling experience when you look back and see what the Bears have done over the years. To be part of that, such a small part of that, but I'll cherish that till the end.
Thanks for watching Before They Were the Bears.
Before They Were the Bears has been sponsored by Decatur Memorial Hospital, Jackson Ford, and Tate & Lyle. This has been a WAND-TV presentation.